Welcome to episode number 33 of the GrowthArtic podcast. Today, our first special guest.
Interview guest.
Welcome, Kevin Indig.
Hello, Kevin.
What's up, guys? Nice talking to you.
Thank you for taking the time, man. Where are you at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm all over the place. Right now, I'm in good old Germany, in my hometown, but I'm about to fly back to the Bay Area next week.
So, which Bay Area is that?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah, it's the San Francisco Bay Area. It's interesting. San Francisco, we call it the Bay Area and this city. Very, very egocentric right there. But yeah, it's the San Francisco Bay Area.
So, do you have one of those extremely overpriced apartments in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it's so tempting to just move into a truck and just save all that money, work there for a year, get rich, and then bounce. It is, yes, I do have one of those overpriced apartments. It hurts every month.
We here in Germany, we only hear about it, but nobody talks numbers. So can you give us an idea of what an apartment for a humble entrepreneur might cost in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so there is a slight difference between the city of San Francisco and moving a bit further south towards the Silicon Valley. But you start at around $3,000 for a studio apartment.
How many square
and then if you want a bedroom,
meters?
then you have to pay about $3,500 and upwards, depending on where you want to live.
How many square meters do you have?
That is about, a studio apartment is 30 to 40 square meters, and then a one bedroom is 40 to 50, sometimes 60, depending on what kind of, what apartment you get. But yeah, those are numbers we're talking about.
That is one of the differences between Silicon Valley and good old Germany that we would love to talk about in this episode.
You have to live in batches.
You just have to stack your stuff high. Today we'd love to talk in this first episode. We're probably going to do 2 episodes about the differences between the Silicon Valley startup scene in Germany, because you're also involved in the German accelerator, right? Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, of course. So the German Accelerator is basically a startup program sponsored by the German government to bring German startups over to the Silicon Valley and to basically kickstart them for 3 months. So they're being mentored and educated in whatever area they need, whether that's HR or legal or go-to-markets, sales, all that kind of stuff. And I mentor startups specifically for the topic of growth. It's very interesting because we have startups from all kinds of industries, B2C, B2B, there's a very big emphasis on a couple of industries like clean tech, robotics, machine learning. It's the typical or stereotypical German engineering that you also see reflected in the startups that come over to the Valley. So that's what the German Accelerator basically is.
Cool. Do you have some common examples?
I think a big startup that's in the media right now is Celonis. I think they raised a lot of money. B2C example would be Nestpig, which is a startup that is a marketplace for medium-term rentals. If you want to rent an apartment for like longer than a month, but not longer than like 6 months, somewhere in between that time range, then there a meta search for that. We had Reflect, which is a startup from Munich. They're a virtual reality startup that helps. They have lots of different applications, but basically what they provide you is a 3D manual of a machine so that you can repair it, right? If you want to kind of repair a turbine of an airplane, you see it in 3D and you see the parts and you see how things should look like, or a coffee machine, all that kind of stuff. So it's things from all over the place. We have startups that make artificial intelligence for self-driving cars. And so, it's a real hotspot there in the Silicon Valley when it comes to German startups in the US. And then we're also very closely, we're keeping a close eye on the German market and seeing what's coming on here, because we scout a lot of startups, and startups can apply to the program. So that's why we kind of have a really good comparison between the two.
So do you think it makes sense, like, to help German startups to go to Silicon Valley, or do you rather think we should focus on building our own ecosystem here, or both? I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and it is a very broad question as well. So I'll do my best to kind of contain it a little bit and focus. The answer is it does make sense for German startups to go over to the Silicon Valley in most cases. So first of all,
Cheers.
You want to hit a certain size or stage, right? So if you're product market fit, if you haven't reached product market fit yet, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You should have some sort of traction, first customers, and then sort of expand to the US. But there are a couple of really good reasons to do that. First of all, once you have traction, there is a certain clock that's running down where you need to go to market relatively quickly, otherwise the market will be too crowded, right? So depending, of course, what your product is, usually other companies or founders take notes, and if they see a small product being, or a product being successful in a small market in another country, then it's very tempting for them to replicate that in the US. And we Germans, we do and did the same over here in Germany. For example, Rocket Internet did lots of companies that were, I don't want to say one-to-one copies, but heavily inspired by German startups. So there is a certain time component involved. But then there's also a learning curve that is accelerated when you go over to the US. And that's because...
Why is that? Yeah.
So, the Silicon Valley is a very, concentrated scene and hotspot in terms of startups, right? You get very quickly in touch with other founders, with engineers, you find talent, you find investors, right? It is very, it's basically the source that you go back to. And then as a third argument, I would say the customer base in the US is much larger and broader, right? It's a bigger economy. It is a country that speaks one language. And so it is easier to capture if you have a good product than Europe, which is much more fragmented.
Yeah, and the laws and all the legal stuff you have to do, the VAT mess here.
But just for me to understand a little bit better, because we're always hearing something about journeys or traveling to the Silicon Valley. Like it seems to me like going to a zoo. Yeah, to get, okay, you can meet organized investors and something, but you say, okay, it's really easy to come and to get in contact with. How does it work? So
here in Germany, it's mostly in the co-working spaces.
Yeah, if it's a meetup, you have to go there. It's a meetup or whatever it is. But how does it work? If we come to the Silicon Valley now, what is your recommendation? What to do?
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing that you ask, because a couple of times I gave presentations to Silicon Valley visitors, where
the zoo
companies
visitors
tie together a group of executives, even from highly regarded big German companies, corporations, sent them over to get a taste of the valley and understand how the valley works. And so that happens more often than not. And then there's the whole tourism where people go on site to Facebook or
and making the selfies in front of this hacker street #1 in Facebook, right?
Yeah. That kind of stuff. And it's funny to see. And honestly, when I first came to the valley, I did the same thing, man. I went to these places because I wanted to not only see what it looks like, but also soak up the air a little bit, And there is something to that. But to answer your question directly, what should I do? So if you come to the valley to seek funding, to talk to investors, then first of all, you need to figure out, or it depends on what you want to achieve, right? If you actually want to raise funds from American investors, you need to incorporate in the US. You need to have an incorporation, Delaware Inc. or something like that, at least an S corp, because the chance of you getting funding without having a legal entity in the US is close to zero. It happens rarely, but it is very rare, as I said. And so if you want to get in touch, first of all, you need to enter the ecosystem. So you need to start getting to know a couple of people, even if that's at some random meetup. You need to start somewhere. And because the Silicon Valley is so highly connected, you usually get from person to person. And then you can also reach out to investors directly, right? You can go to the site of Y Combinator, which is an accelerator, but you can go to Andreessen Horowitz, to Sequoia Capital, to whatever you want, and you can apply. You can send an email, send in a pitch deck. That being said, your chances to get through and get a meeting are really low. It is much more helpful to get a warm intro, to talk to somebody who has connections to the investors.
Yeah.
And that is also something that we help with in the German Accelerator. So we don't make promises that you will get funding or you will talk to, to the big guys. But we'll do our best. If your product is good and if you build a serious company and if you invest the time and effort, then we'll do our best to connect you to investors. And a lot of times it works out.
Can I ask you something about the incorporation part?
Yeah, please.
So do you think most US investors would prefer if they were involved in the incorporation process or if you set it up beforehand? Because in Germany, investors love to be involved in the process because they have so much experience, they have much more influence on the contracting. How is it in the US?
Yeah, in the US, you want to make sure to have that done before you talk to investors, because in a lot of times they don't really care that much. The legal system works very different in the US compared to Germany, but the impact that investors have is not as great when it comes to the incorporation. Take into account that I'm not a legal expert, right?
No, of course not.
Take this with a grain of salt, right? I'm not giving advice here.
We're talking trash.
Usually, what an investor wants to hear, as of my experience, is, "Hey, we're all set up. All we need is the money. Like we have traction, we have a go-to-market strategy. We have talent. We're incorporated. We have a patent on our IP. All we need is the funds, and then we can, skyrocket through the market."
I've heard good things about Stripe Atlas as a service. Are there any? So Stripe Atlas is a service that helps you to incorporate and have a bank account in Delaware. Do you have any other recommendations on where to go for that besides Stripe Atlas?
It is actually, there are a couple of startups that provide services to incorporate. You can even do it on the site yourself. It is not a huge deal. It usually goes relatively quickly. When it becomes tricky are two things. The first one is when you have a couple of co-founders and you want to split equity and all these kind of things. That adds more complexity to the topic. And then when you have a new technology that you want to register a patent for, which I very, very much recommend every company to do. If you're just a marketplace, quote unquote, and you don't really have a new technology, then you can live without a patent. But as soon as you do anything, again, in the machine learning space, robotics, clean tech, hardware, any of these technologies, the first thing you need to do is register patents.
Crazy. I wouldn't have expected that advice. Okay. I'm usually like,
Okay, that's the case of being a startup, coming to the Silicon Valley, starting something there, or looking for some fundings. What I would be interested in is your personal thing, because I think there are a lot of people, or I could imagine there are a lot of people who say, okay, I want to work in the Silicon Valley. So maybe just for you the chance to explain what was your way, what was your way to work in Silicon Valley, and what was your what drives you to go there? Because the step, I think there are a lot of people wishing for or looking for, but nobody's doing it. Why? So what was your story?
Yeah, what's my story? I cheated basically. So I was incredibly lucky to be born with two citizenships. So my father is American,
nice.
My mother is German. So I have both passports, and that makes all the difference in the world. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible for other people to go over to the Valley. I personally, I always wanted to go to California. Even when I was a kid in kindergarten, I said, one day I'll live in America, because I grew up with that, with that Californian lifestyle. I have aunt and uncle in Los Angeles, and since I was a small kid, we were visiting them. Okay. So, as a kid, this is paradise for you, right? There's beach, there's sun, there's Disneyland, everywhere's sugar and all that kind of stuff. So I loved it, right? And it kind of stuck with me. So I had that wish to go over from the beginning. And then I also wanted to make sure I have some sort of vehicle, namely a job, to get me over there. I didn't just want to go and then find a job. I wanted to make sure I have a job before I go. And so I started in search engine optimization here in Germany, and because the space is relatively small, people know each other, I quickly got in touch with somebody who opened an office over in the Silicon Valley. It's a company called Searchmetrics. After a long interview process and lots of discussions, they were ready to send me over, and so I helped build the professional services team for Searchmetrics over in the Silicon Valley. And that was my entry ticket. And from there, things just took off and moved on. There are a lot of people who ask me how to go over, and there are a couple of ways. If you're a student, definitely try to get into an American college, even though it costs more. You kind of have a foot on the ground. You get in touch quickly with people, and your chances are much higher to be employed. If you're out of college and you're fresh out of college, an internship, there is a specific visa for an internship that can get you over. That is also a great idea. And in any other way, you can still apply. But generally, the more specialized in the field you are, the higher your chances to come over. Why is that? Because an American company basically has to justify in front of the court why they're hiring a German for a job and not an American. So you want to make sure you have a very specific skill that they might not be able to find that well on the American market, and that is a way to come over. And then a last tip that I can give is to apply at German startups in the Valley, right? So you could look, for example, through all the companies that have been a German accelerator, see if they have an office in the Valley, and then apply and then get in touch with them, because for them it's a bit easier to bring you over. But yeah, that's basically how you can come over, and I can very strongly recommend it. It helps a lot to boost a career. You learn a ton. You build a great network, and I think you can say that a Silicon Valley year is maybe 3 or 4 years over in Europe, without dissing Europe too much, right? But it's the acceleration of things you learn in your career is just that much faster.
But it's similar when an American has spent a year abroad in old Europe, it's always a big show of talent, and it's assumed a high status. The other way around too. One question: how about guys like us or you yourself working there as a freelancer? Is that a possibility? Is that even easier, or is it harder as a W employee?
I think it is definitely possible. I know a couple of people who work on a pure freelance basis. It is a bit more tricky because the costs are so high. So you definitely want to make sure you offer something that a lot of companies need. And if you're, I need to think about an example, something where if you're a super broad marketer with maybe a year experience on the job, then I maybe wouldn't recommend it. If you're highly specialized and, some feel like legal or growth or engineering, then you can make a really good living as a freelancer. So it's not impossible at all. It's just a higher hurdle because the costs are so high. And I think that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And at the same time, a lot of companies offer really, really good perks. In terms of insurance, in terms of on-site stuff like laundry, food, and massages, and all that crazy stuff. So it is very tempting to be an employee. But when you start a startup, when you're a founder, you're very similar to a freelancer as well. So it's definitely not possible.
I have to think about it because I have 2 little girls. One is 1 year old and the other one is 3. And we would like to spend a year in probably rather Canada than US. But taking that as an opportunity, like working as a growth marketer for a German company that wants to expand to the US, I like that idea a lot. And I have to think about it because it's in Germany we are forced by law to send our kids to school. It's a very tough time to get somebody to homeschooling. But not impossible. And so I would love to spend a year on another continent, Australia or Canada.
So for me, it would be the same, just for 1 year of learning, just learning how it works with this 4 years being in advance to see how it works. Because from here's the European or German filter bubble. And we're always looking to the Silicon Valley stuff, to the big startups, to the big corporates, but honestly, there is no connection at all. We have no idea how it works. And so here everybody has to make himself think big. Okay, now we have to think big, but it always feels like they think big.
It's a cultural difference as well, right? In the Valley, the ideas are huge and people are, I would say, a bit more optimistic and sometimes naive too, right? There's a certain component of naivete when you start a startup and you have a great vision, right? That's the definition of it. Otherwise, people would have already done it. So I think both would be interesting, right? Americans coming over to Germany and Germans coming over to the Valley or to America, because I think it's also helpful for Americans to get a better grasp on the German perspective. Germany actually does not have to hide in the world from growth or marketing or engineering, right? Germans are just very humble. They always sell themselves a little worse than they actually are, and they're always a little more trying to not come across as arrogant or crazy. But Germans actually they have a lot going for themselves, and they're very meticulous and very efficient, of course, but in most things, but they're also very deliberate and conscientious. So those are all attributes that I think Americans could definitely take away from Germans and come over to learn something. So there's something to take away from both sides.
Would you say that if you were, imagine you yourself now being a freelancer, you told us that you're changing jobs at the moment, would you play up that German card or would you not?
That is a great question. Well, it is almost hard to not do that, right? The reputation of Germans and Germany, especially in the US, is really, really good, right? Again, Germans, they are regarded as very efficient, hardworking people, serious, analytical people, and it's not completely wrong. I think there's definitely a lot of those are very right. I don't try to play the German card actively, but of course I don't mind when people say that about me.
Made in Germany, Kevin Indig, made in Germany.
But I think Germans need to hear that.
Yeah, that's important.
That it's a huge asset to be German. I lived for a year, like a high school exchange year there, and when we did like group work, people said it's unfair they have the German in the team. And school was comparatively easy. Depending on which level you were at in class. So anything else that like topics you would like to discuss from this Germany, Silicon Valley perspective that we might not think about asking?
Yeah, totally, sure. So just to add a little sentence to the previous topic, I just want to make sure that people understand that Germans can be very proud of themselves, right? They're good, smart people. They're doing a great job. They should embrace that. So that's all I wanted to say to that. When it comes to differences between the Silicon Valley and Germany, there are a couple more differences that I think are worth talking about. First, let's talk a bit about the factors of what made the Silicon Valley so successful, because that's a question that I ask myself. Why did it start there? And it's more than just the industrial background and history in that area. There are more components. There are basically three main areas, or there are lots of different factors. But I would boil them down to three areas. The first one is are the universities, right? The Silicon Valley, you have Stanford and Berkeley, which brings a lot of talent. And that talent has been exposed to very critical thinking, because the San Francisco area was always, driven by hippies, and not driven by hippies, but was much more liberal and much more left thinking than many other areas in the U.S. So that plays a huge part. There's the talent and the thinking. The second thing is that the Silicon Valley brings a lot of money, right? Not only because of nowadays venture capital companies, but because there were some bigger companies that bought other companies and that kept the talent there, and that funded lots of startups. It's almost like a snowball system. And then as a third component, I would say the network and the geographical proximity is so much closer. The Bay Area, when you look at it, is actually a very, very isolated, concentrated piece of land, right? There's not a lot of ways to escape, and that's also one of the reasons for why the housing is so expensive, because you have a huge hole in the middle that's filled with water, right? And then you drive it a bit further outside, and there's nothing there really. So I think those three factors play together. So when you then compare that to Germany, we see almost the exact opposite, right? We see a lot more fragmentation, meaning there are a lot more hubs in Germany when it
like
comes to startups. There's
Berlin, Munich,
there's something
Cologne.
going on in Munich. Of course, you guys are in Cologne. There's Hamburg, right? There's not that concentrated space that has that is basically forced to be much smaller and isolated. So that takes more time to bring up. That's why I think the German startup ecosystem looks so different compared to the US. And that's also why there are lots of methodologies like Agile, Lean Startup, Lean Launchpad, all these these approaches that came out of the Valley, because there are way more people that run into each other and exchange ideas, and so it has a very compounding effect.
So about that, so you mentioned the 3 points, and one of them was that it's also dense, but I also see different startup cultures. Yeah, for example, in Germany, I would say Berlin is more the hyper growth oriented thing, while Cologne is a bit more lifestyle founders, a bit more. Yeah. And in the US, from what I perceive through podcasts and YouTube, you have the Silicon Valley, but then a beautiful new hub that is in Austin, Texas. Yeah, where many more startups are that do not like this Silicon Valley hype, the overpriced everything. And then investors like Chris Sacca, who just say, I'm moving out of this, I'm building a huge place where I can invite the investors, the startups who are interested in talking to me, get them out of the Valley, and have them over there for a couple of months. And I like that type of fragmentation, actually. Yeah, it's to me it adds to the culture, because Silicon Valley caters to a very specific type of founder. Yeah, but there are so many more diverse people. Yeah, that for me, for example, I made the conscious decision 6-7 years ago not to move to Berlin. Yeah.
Me too. So for me, what's even more interesting is that we in Germany, that we have a corporate culture, and that we have the corporates as a back behind us. So there are a lot of corporates looking for innovation, a lot of corporates looking for new ideas and startups. So we don't have to invent everything from the beginning on. Yeah. So we have this kind of corporate culture behind us. Maybe if I would make the difference between Berlin and the rest of Germany, I would say in Berlin there's a lot of stuff coming from single people having ideas and try to start something as an entrepreneur. And in the rest, like here in the Cologne or in the western area, like Cologne, Düsseldorf, Bonn and the Ruhrpott and so on, it's more like we have the big corporates and we can go with the big corporates and help the big corporates to invent new ideas or to get the best talents for them. I think it's a totally another game.
Yeah, it's very
something in
different, very slow game.
It is, but it's a different.
In the German accelerator, we see companies that have funding from the big corporations in Germany, whether that's car companies or like a Siemens or Bosch, those kind of companies, and it does make a difference. But to add a bit more context, these companies are just starting to explore how investing works and how to push a company. And
they're rolling back already.
What resources to provide, what connections to make. Yeah. So I do think that that will be a very successful model, but it needs a bit of experience first.
It needs experience, and it needs curiosity
and balls.
That's it.
Like,
balls is better.
Just look at the comments under Audi's e-tron introduction videos on LinkedIn and on YouTube. It's like, what the fuck, Quattro has been there for e-vehicles, and what the fuck do we want to do with e-vehicles in the countryside? That's not what EV is about. You are not getting it again, and you're investing. You're this huge juggernaut company compared to a Tesla, and what the fuck are you doing with this money? That's the biggest problem for me for the German big companies, for the culture. We are so timid, to make big steps. And how do we get this here? Do we need more people who have spent some time over there?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe that would be my last question for the first episode. So what is your recommendation for us here in Germany or in Europe? What can we, what should we do for as a startup, as an entrepreneur, or as a curious worker for a corporate or something? What should we do? What can we learn? Where can we start learning from people from the Silicon Valley or from to get this kind of mindset?
Or should we not? Should we not?
Should
embrace
we position
this Germanness?
Yeah, to stay here in our filter bubble and work on Dieselmotoren.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, wrap it up nicely.
So,
no pressure.
No, so maybe we can look at a couple of other regions in the world that can compete more efficiently with Silicon Valley to get an idea of how we can better compete ourselves. So there are two regions that come to mind. The first one is Israel, which is impressive when it comes to the country size and how many startups they create and sell to the US. They sell startups for billions and billions. So I think IBM has bought an Israeli startup. I don't remember the name right now, but I think it was like a $10 billion acquisition. Crazy. So what are those guys doing differently? I mean, the country is as big as maybe the German, state of Hessen or something. Like that. Tiny company. So country. So what they're doing are a couple of things. First of all, they think much bigger, and they have a larger market in their back of their mind. Because the country is that small, they know that if they want to be successful, they have to expand to other countries, right?
Yep.
Scandinavia
is the same.
And then they have a very heavy focus on English, of course. That always helps. They have great universities, and then they also have a little, I want to say, disadvantage, which is an advantage, and that is the military. Because in Israel, everybody has to go to the military. They're usually very early on exposed to leadership and technology, and they also have the chance to invent new technology for the military, which they then can use for startups and then, sell to other companies.
And great IT
or
education.
Exit. Yeah. Another interesting area in the world is China, which is, very quickly becoming very competitive in terms of technology, and they're sometimes very creative when it comes to business models, monetization, and so on, right? What they're doing is, of course, a bit different than a country like Israel, for example. Chinese startups have much higher issues expanding to other countries, but they bring a certain think big mentality, which I think is also rooted a little bit in the Chinese culture. Also because it's simply a much larger market, much more homogeneous, not as fragmented as Europe. So what should we take away from that? For a founder, well, across the line, I would say take more risk. Take more risk is one thing that we definitely need to get better at as Germans, and I include myself there. And I think that comes from a founder perspective where we need to dare to think bigger. Right, we need to think about how can we revolutionize the medical system, or what can we do in terms of cars? Should we think of fractional improvements or 10x improvements, moonshots, those kind of things? We need more visionaries, and we need to dare to think in that way. And then I think we need a bit more optimism, right? And that goes hand in hand with the risk taking. You can only take risks if you're optimistic. That's inherent. And then we need to network a bit better. We need to make sure that we're more outgoing. We invite other startups over, talk, exchange information, even if we're in a similar or same space. I think that is really crucial, because if you look at Israel and China, they're doing very good jobs in consolidating and bringing together people to make sure that they exchange what they learned. They exchange strategies, tactics, results, all that kind of stuff. And then the funding just needs to grow, right? In Israel, you have very strong venture capital. In China, you have a huge load of venture capital, and in the Silicon Valley as well. And when you look at the investments that European and German founders make, then we need to 10x that rather than 5x. Little caveat, once again, we cannot simply pump money into the system. It has to, we have to gain that experience too. So I think it will take a little bit of time, but a greater will to take risks can definitely accelerate that progress.
We need some successful exits here, like really high scale things that would show that this is a place on the earth that's on the map. Is there one point I want to pick up is you mentioned the propensity to use English as the natural second language or the first language of your product. Yeah, this is the reason why we do this here in English. Yeah, because we want to have this open world, open mindset to invite other people to discuss what we are saying, to call bullshit on what we are saying, to challenge us, of course, and that's what I'm missing a lot.
Yeah, true.
Do you have, like, as a last thing, recommend a book? Like, for example, one book I love to read here was the 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel. Think what you want of Peter Thiel, but this book is pretty nice. It's talking about this point that those small iterative bets that we are doing here, that they are not big enough. They are the 1 to 100 ideas, but the 0 to 1 is really tough. I quite enjoyed it. Do you have any other recommendations?
Yeah, I love 0 to 1. It was also a book that impacted me heavily. Totally agree to the recommendation there. Other books that I really liked are some of the classics, like 4 Steps to the Epiphany from Steve Blank.
Yeah.
I like The Lean Startup, of course, from Eric Ries. I like, what else do I have? I like Viral Loops, very good book. I like Principles by Ray Dalio. It's not very close to growth or go-to-market, but it just helps you to improve your thinking and your decision-making.
Yeah, I have it over there as well.
Then maybe as a last one that is also not super close to marketing is Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Very same reason. It's not super close to marketing, but it very much helps you to think bigger and be more humble at the same time.
Have the stoic mindset. And it was a good one too. Yeah, thank you for those recommendations. Would you like to add anything?
We had already this, how is it called? This story brand?
Story branding.
Story branding thing is something what I'm really into this year, but everybody knows. Okay, cool, Kevin. So I think it's enough for the first episode.
Are you willing to go for another one?
Sure.
Cool. So we're gonna dig into Kevin's predictions, which you can read on Kevin-Indig. How do you spell that? .com.
Yeah, Kevin-Indig. It's spelled INDIG, similar to the color indigo, but without the O.com.
A great blog. We will also link to that in the show notes on growthartic.com/33.
33 already.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there you will find the usual links to subscribe and follow and comment on this episode. We would love to hear your feedback on this. And if you have any questions for Kevin, I'm sure we'll make him answer you in the comments.
Yeah.
Right?
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this
See you in a minute.
See you later.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.